Good morning, guys. Happy Good Friday to you. So I'm off school. I'm a school teacher. I got a week off because of spring break, so I got some time to make a little more of these videos. Now, I was talking with somebody on Facebook, and they were asking a little bit about walleye fishing in the spring. And a lot of guys do jigging in rivers for walleye. Walleye are moving into those rivers to spawn, and they're hanging out in those rivers for a while afterwards. And so people are heading places like the Detroit River, to go catch them. That's a lot of fun. I did that a few years ago for the first time. I was moderately successful, but I learned a lot. I went a few years later and did very well. So there are a couple basics about this walleye jigging, and we're talking about jigging vertically, which is straight up and down in a river with current and trying to catch walleye. So I'm going to go over a couple details to help you maybe be a little more successful in that. Now, if you're a pro at this, all of this is going to be very basic. But I'm betting there's a lot of not pros out there that would benefit from some information. So let's head to Detroit. Hey, there's my boat. We're basic walleye jigging. There's the Renaissance Center. Okay, that's in downtown Detroit, of course. In Trenton, in the Trenton Channel, which is part of the Detroit River, there's a smokestack that's painted red and white striped. We call that the candy cane. So there's a couple landmarks. If you're seeing those things, you're on the Detroit River. Congratulations, you got there. Okay, so here's my boat, and there's a lot of things going on here. Okay, first you'll notice I'm standing up in front of the boat, and my line is straight down. I'm fishing at about 18 to 24 feet of water. That's the Detroit River. Okay, there's current going one way. I've got fish tight to the bottom, and that bottom looks terrible. It's all snaggy. There's lots of rocks and stuff. So let's talk through a couple of these things. Okay, my goal is to drift along with the current, so steady with that current that my line is always straight up and down. Okay? That's possible if there's zero wind and you drift, and I have the trolling motor in the front just lightly turning to keep the nose of the boat pointing upstream. My boat will slip down current with the current, and I can keep my line straight up and down. So that trolling motor is important. If you don't have that, your boat can spin and do things going downriver, and it makes this almost impossible to do. Okay, so I gotta look at my lighting here. All right, so let's say I've got a wind pushing me this way a little faster. That means my line's gonna swing a little more. I've got to use my trolling motor and make up for that to get my line back straight up and down. This is critical. And here's the thing. If I'm doing this, then I can feel my bait ticking off the top of these. But can you imagine if your line's like this? You're dragging across the top of those rocks. And this is a difference between losing, 5 or 6 jigs or losing like 15 jigs because you're dragging the bottom. Okay, most guys, when I bring people who have not done this before, they're the 15 jig loss guy. Okay, we got to teach people, get that thing straight up and down, and just once in a while, you should feel that tick on the rocks. That lets you know you're right in business there. You're bouncing along, you're doing the right thing. Okay, there are things that make this possible. You have to understand the current. You have to understand keeping the nose of the boat pointing upstream. You use your trolling motor to do that. Now, if I've got a side wind, that gets even harder. So I got to turn the trolling motor to make up for that side wind and still be slipping downstream. And you can see this is almost like playing a drum set. You're using your foot move, doing one thing. You're jigging with your hands. Sometimes I jig with 2 poles. And so I'm watching 2 lines, plus playing with my feet and keeping the boat straight. It's pretty busy. And if you don't do it right, you're going to keep snagging the bottom and you're going to get really frustrated. You're going to lose a lot of jigs. Bring a lot of jigs. Okay, so this is basically what we're trying to accomplish. And if we do this, you should be in a position that if you're fishing in a right spot and you got the right bait on, you're going to catch fish. You're not going to lose a lot of stuff, but all of this has to be happening. Okay, and the most important thing, again, is that straight up and down line just ticking off the top. Okay, I am constantly adjusting my line, pulling a little out. If it's ticking too much, I'm pulling some in. I'm constantly adjusting it at the reel. Okay, sometimes I'm reeling my rod up and down, okay, just to keep it right. Now I'm going to point out something else. Here, I'm going to flip to another page. We're going to talk about the jigging motion. There's different theories on this. Please don't bash me if mine is not yours. Yours is probably better. I don't catch a lot of walleye, but I'm just trying to help people out. So give a brother a break. Here we go. Okay, let's talk about our basic setup. We're talking jig sizes first. Jig size, the bigger jigs, the more things that you have to contend with, more depth, more wind, are going to move you up in your jig size. For most places like this, 1/2 ounce is a good place to start, but sometimes that's not heavy enough. If you're having trouble keeping your line straight, if you're having trouble feeling that tick of the jig bumping the top of the rocks, bump up a size. And yes, I also know math, and there are sizes between these. I think 5/8 is like in there someplace, and there's other sizes, so you can break this down more. I'm just keeping it basic, folks. I start with a 1/2 ounce. If I can't feel the bottom, I bump up a little bit. Okay, that's jig size. Let's talk about the rig. All right, there's my jig. This size can change, as I said, depending on the depth and the wind. But generally, for a Detroit River setup, if I've got the current, which is pretty strong, and there's not a lot of wind, I can start with 1/2 ounce, but I usually have to move up to 3/4 and sometimes a full ounce. Okay, here's my rig. I've got this. Here's my jig. I'm going to put on generally a 4-inch something. Some guys use straight worms. Some guys use worms with a little, they call it a curl tail or a sickle tail. Some guys use flukes. It's more shaped like a minnow. All kinds of colors can work. For me, this has been a pretty good one. It's a curly-tailed 4-inch worm. Power bait gives it a little flavor, but there's all kinds of things that you can use. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put that worm on my hook. And I want you to see something. Without this, that's a lot of worm that a walleye can bite, and I'm not going to hook him. So we need to add a stinger hook. Okay, here's what a stinger hook is. It's literally a tiny treble hook. It's about 2 inches of line, maybe 1.5 inches. It's got a loop, and this loop is filled with rubber. Okay, so I'm going to slip that loop and punch this hook through the rubber. That's going to hold it in place. Okay, then I'm going to pull that back and I'm going to lightly bury that hook, one of them, into the worm. That's going to keep it there. So now anywhere that fish bites, it's going to get hooked. And I'll tell you what, I catch an awful lot of fish on that stinger. So if you're not using one, I would check yourself. You're probably missing some fish that you could be catching. Okay, that's my basic setup. Okay, that's my drawing. I'm going to take you over and I'm going to show you. This is my actual rig. Okay. Again, the color can be different. There are fancy jig heads with shiny eyes and all kinds of shapes. I'm not going to get into that. You can try what you want to try. Okay, but this is a basic 4-inch worm. This is where my jig hook stops. Okay, there's my little rubber-coated loop, and it trails back to a treble hook. That's buried in the worm, and then I got my curly tail at the end. This is my rig. We use this pretty often. I might change the color of the head once in a while or the color of the body, but this is the basic rig. Okay, and again, as we said, I'm trying to keep this straight up and down and bouncing it along the top of the, basically bouncing along the top of the rocks. And if I'm doing that and fish are there, you're going to start catching some. Okay, last thing I want to show you. I didn't plan on this, but it occurs to me this is probably a pretty important feature. So I'm going to draw, here's the front of my boat. Okay, here's the water. You can send me awards for my drawing later. Let's just, yeah. Okay, so here's my pole, and I'm jigging. Okay, so here's what people ask. How do you jig? Like literally, what is the jigging motion? So here's what I like to do. Okay, I have my starting position, and my starting position is going to be about down here. I'd say maybe a foot above the water. And right here, if my rod is here, I want to be ticking rocks, okay? Then I'm going to sweep my rod up, and sometimes it's a little harder, sometimes it's a lower. I'm going to do it anywhere from 2 to 3 feet, okay? So I'm going to hop this jig up, and then I'm going to lower it slowly. I don't want to make slack line here because then the jig can hook its line, that stinger hook can tangle. I want to lift it and then I want to lower it at the rate that that jig falls. I don't want to see a big loose slack line there. Okay, I want to see it pretty tight. It's almost like I'm lowering it on my own at the speed gravity pulls it down. Okay, I'm going to hop it. I'm going to ease it down. I'm going to hop it. I'm going to ease it down. Right around here, I want to feel tick, tick. I'm going to lift it. And somewhere in there, one of two things are going to happen. When I lift, it's going to be heavy. Okay? Fish on. Okay? If you're not sure, always set the hook. If it's a rock, okay, you set the hook into a rock. But you don't want to not set it when it's a fish. So when in doubt, set the hook. Okay? The other thing that's going to happen is I'm going to lower, and it's never going to feel like it really got down. I'm not going to see that line tighten because a fish caught it on the drop. You're going to want to set the hook then. So they can hit it on the lift and it's heavy, or they can hit it on the drop and the line stays slack. Okay, either way, set the hook, fight your fish, do your thing. Okay, I think that's pretty much the basic. If you go over there and you do those things, you should be good to go. Okay, a couple things. So I went beginning of May. I come to find out that's more at the end of the run. Now, every year is different. I understand it's all about water temperature and weather and stuff. But if you're not getting too far into that and you want a calendar time, April is a good month to go. Earlier, the big females move in. So your bigger fish come in earlier, beginning of April, maybe even end of March. Okay. A lot of males will come in after. Okay, as I understand it. If I'm wrong, you can correct me in the comments. But males come in later. So when I went in the beginning of May, I caught a lot of fish, 20 inches, 22 inches, but I didn't catch any big ones. The females had kind of cleared out, it seemed like. Males were still hanging around. If you wait much after the beginning of May, white bass start coming in. Okay? White bass are, 12 to, 15 inches long. They're a lot of fun to catch, but they're irritating if you're after walleye because the same thing that you use for walleye catches white bass, and an awful lot of them. Sometimes we will go fish walleye in the main river. Then we're going to go find like a creek that feeds in, someplace that the water's warmed up. We're going to pull up into that creek or hang at the mouth of the creek, and we're going to go catch white bass. And I mean, you can take 25 of them. So we get 4 people in our boat. That's 100 fish. And we'll keep 100 fish. And that's what I fill my freezer with every spring. So when I have fish fries all summer long, it's white bass. And they came from the Detroit River. That's a lot of fun. I take younger kids to do that because this walleye thing is pretty hard for younger kids to understand, to not constantly be snagging that bottom and making me crazy. So we'll go fish for white bass. My son, Willie, when he's 8 or 9, he was casting and catching all the white bass he wanted to. He's getting a little older. He's 11 now. Maybe when he's 12 or so, I'm going to take him and do the walleye, and I think he gets it. But keep that calendar in mind. Beginning of April, bigger fish, but not as many. Middle April and end of April, more males are coming in. The river's starting to really load up. Okay, by the end of April and into beginning of May, I think the females kind of move back into the big lake, Lake Erie. The males hang out a little longer. Okay, it seems to me. By mid-May and end of May, it's all white bass. There may be some walleye hanging that live in the river, but the river's overrun with white bass. So I hope that helps. I hope the jigging makes sense to you. We sometimes plan a trip, like I said, beginning of May, we can catch walleye, we can get white bass at the end in the channels, in creeks, and that's a lot of fun. So hope it's helpful. Peace, guys. Have a great spring break.